Lesson 2.4 Congruent Supplements and Complements. Today's lesson is going to talk about 4 different theorems, but actually 2 different concepts, referred to it as either supplementary, adding to 180, or complementary, adding to 90. Today's lesson is probably the most challenging one for proofs as of right now for Chapter 2. So focus on this lesson would be very helpful for the rest of the chapter. Let's begin. The first theorem says if two angles are supplementary to the same angle, then the angles are congruent. The shorthand for this theorem would say supplements of the same angle are congruent. Well, what does that mean mathematically? Let's take a look at it. Let's say we have an angle A, an angle B, and then an angle C. And we say A and C are supplement. And we also know B and C are supplement. Then that means that A and B also have to be congruent. Let's take numbers, for example. Let's say angle A is 80. Well, we know it's supplement to C, so that means this is 100. Then we know that B and C are supplement. C can't change its size, so that's 100. So that means the supplement is 80, which means that then A and B end up being congruent. Okay? That's the theorem. Let's see where it comes from. The long way to prove this theorem looks like this. You're starting with A and C are supplement. Underline it because it's given. Angles B and C are supplement. Also given. What does it mean to be supplement? Well, that means that angle A plus angle C has to equal 180. And angle B plus angle C would equal 180. Well, we can take these two statements, bracket them together, and say angle A plus angle C would equal angle B plus angle C. They both have what in common? Angle C. So the idea is if we can eliminate angle C, we could end up with angle A equaling angle B. And then if two angles equal each other, we know that then they end up being congruent, and we're done. Reason 1, to go from here to say 180, this would be definition of supplement. Number 2 would be your substitution. 3 would be we subtracted. We got rid of C, so we did subtraction. And then 4 would be definition of congruent. So this is the long proof for the reason supplements of the same angle are congruent. Instead of using the long way, I want you to use the short way. So what I want you to do is I want you to start with the two givens. A and C would be supplement, and B and C would be supplement. So because these are supplement to the same angle, then you could go right into your answer and say angle A is congruent to angle B. And the reason for that would be the supplements of the same angle are congruent. This is what I want you to use in your proofs. Not the long theorem, that theorem. And hopefully it makes sense to you. We're going to now look at the complementary one for the same idea. If two angles are complementary to the same angle, then the angles are congruent. So it's going to be the same proof as the previous one, but instead of using supplementary, we're going to be using complementary, and instead of adding to 180, it's going to add to 90. But the proof is going to look the same. The shortcut would be the complements of congruent angles are complement of the same angle are congruent. Excuse me for that. Of the same angle are congruent. So it would look like A and C are comp, B and C are comp, which means that A is congruent to B. Not much difference there. So those were the two theorems, similar idea, just different angle measurements. The next theorem says if two angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then the angles are congruent. This one states supplements of congruent angles are congruent. So that's what we're looking at. So now it's not of the same angle, it's of congruent angles. So what we're saying now there's not only three angles, there is actually four angles. So we have angle A, angle B, angle C, and angle D. So we can say A and C are supplement. We can say B and D are supplement. And we're going to start with that C and D are congruent to begin with. Then, if we have those three things, we're going to be able to say that A and B are also congruent. Let's check it out. So if this is 80, its supplement is C, so that's 100. Well, if C is 100, C and D are congruent, so that means D is 100. And D is supplement to B, so if that's 100, B is left over at 80, which then makes A and B also congruent. Let's see where that proof comes from. That proof comes from angles A and C are supplementary. Angle B and D are supplementary. Looking very similar to above, reason out, angle A plus angle C equals 180. Arrow out, angle B plus angle D equals 180. All right, these two together, we can say angle A plus angle C equals angle B plus angle D. They're not the same, so we can't just subtract something. But wait, we also know from the beginning that angle C was congruent to angle D. So, using the definition of congruent, we can say angle C equals angle D. Let's substitute that idea in to there. And then now we can say angle A is equal to angle B, which then means angle A is congruent to angle B, and we're done. Reasons we have. Reason one is definition of supplement. Reason two, you did substitution. Three, definition of congruent. Four, subtraction. And five, definition of congruent again. So we could have technically said this last one was three, but we didn't have to and stated that. Now for what does it look like using this theorem? Well, what we're starting with was that A and C were supplement, B and D were supplement, and C was congruent to D. Those three things together, you could then say the leftover pieces, angle A is congruent to angle B, instead of doing the long way. This is what you want to do, and this reason is the supplements of congruent angles are congruent. This is how you want to use this theorem in your proofs. All right. Now let's move to the same theorem but using complementary. So the last theorem is if two angles are complementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. So complements of congruent angles are congruent. Looks very similar to above, so A and C would be comp, angle B and D would be comp, and angle C would be congruent to angle D. These three things together then gives you A congruent to angle B, and you are done with the reason of complements of congruent angles. So there's the four theorems, two ideas, just the difference between supplementary and complementary. Let's look at three examples together to see how we can apply those reasonings. Let's start out with AB is perpendicular to CB. So what does that mean? Perpendicular causes a right angle. So if you need to give yourself a little hint besides just drawing on the picture, you can say, oh, right, so we're going to get a right angle at ABC. So you know what you're going to use in your proof. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, and then FED is a right angle. So we want to prove 2 and 4 are congruent. Oh, great, that is right, because these are both right. These are the same number, so that means the leftovers have to be the same number. Well, what reason is that? That reason is the one we just learned right here. If two angles are complementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. So we need to make our proof look like this. We need two comp pieces, congruent piece, to get what's left over. Okay, so let's see, where do we start? Let's start with AB is perpendicular to CB. That gave us, reason 1, angle ABC is a right angle. Well, we needed to be complementary. We learned from 2 days ago that if you know something is a right angle and the two angles forming it are adjacent, then you know they are complementary. So we can look at the picture and say, hey, guess what? Angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent, given, underline it. So these two together then can say that angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary. We got one of our comp pieces. Let's get our other comp piece. Where does that come from? That comes from angle FED is a right angle. Underline it. And we can look at it and say angle 3 and angle 4 are adjacent. Underline it. Same reason as number 2 above. Angle 3 is now congruent to comp to angle 4. So we look at it, none of them are to the same angle, but we left one piece out right here. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, given. So 1 and 3 are congruent. These three statements together give me that angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. And we got our conclusion that we wanted. Reason 1, that is definition of perpendicular. Reason 2 states, read it, if two adjacent form a right angle, then complementary. So if two adjacent angles form a right angle, then complementary. Reason 3 is the new one we just learned today. Complements of congruent angles are congruent. And we're done with our first proof from 2.4. All right, let's switch to number 2. All we know is that 7 is congruent to 10. We want to prove 8 and 9 are congruent. So let's look at the picture. What do you notice? Well, I notice that 7 and 8 are adjacent. They're also forming this straight angle. So guess what? These two are going to be supplementary. Same thing over here. These two are adjacent. They're forming this straight angle, so they're supplementary. And 7 and 10 are congruent. So if we know there's supplementary and another supplementary piece, and you have a congruent piece, that means the leftovers have to be congruent from the previous theorem that we have. So let's start it out. So we know angle 7 and angle 8 are adjacent. Underline it because it's given. We also can look at the picture and assume ABC is a straight angle because you can assume straight angles. These two ideas together, reason 1, angle 7 and angle 8 are supplementary. One supplementary piece. Second supplementary piece comes from the other side. 9 and 10 are adjacent. Angle ABC is still straight. Those two together, same reason. Angles 9 and angle 10 are supplementary. Not the same angles, but we knew that 7 and 10 were congruent. Given, underline it. Reason 2, we're done with our proof. Angle 8 is congruent to angle 9. Two reasons. Once again, reason 1 this time is if two angles are adjacent and straight, then they are supplementary. So if two adjacent angles form straight angle, then supplementary. Get familiar with that one because you'll be using it quite often. And then number 2, also be familiar with, and this is not, I'm specifically saying not substitution. So do not use substitution. Supplements of congruent angles are congruent. Supplements of congruent angles are congruent. Say it a couple times to yourself until it sinks into your head. Look at your flashcards, to get to know it. You need to do something to get it into your brain, just like when you started learning how to count and add and stuff like that. Last one, let's finish it up. BC bisects angle DBE. Well, what does it mean to bisect? That's right. It means to cut it into two congruent pieces. So angle 2 and angle 4 are congruent because BC was bisecting angle DBE. We want to prove 1 and 3 are congruent. So let's look at our picture. Very similar to the picture before, where 1 and 2 are adjacent. They're also creating line ABC. So these are supplementary. Angle 3 and 4 are adjacent, and they're creating a line. So they're supplementary. So we can do a very similar proof and say the supplements of congruent angles are congruent. So then the leftovers 1 and 3 have to be congruent. Let's start out with angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent. Angle ABC is a straight angle. These two together give me angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. Next one, angle 3 and angle 4 are adjacent, also creating line segment ABC being a straight angle. Those two together give you angle 3 congruent to supplement to angle 4. And then let's not forget our bisector piece. BC bisects angle DBE. Underline it because it's given. This gives us our congruent piece of angle 2 congruent to angle 4. And these three things together are up to reason 3. Supplement piece, congruent piece. The leftovers 1 and 3 have to be congruent. Reason 1, if two adjacent angles form a straight angle, then supplementary. And the second one, we went from bisector, and what kind of bisector? Angle. So we got definition of angle bisector. And 3, the supplements of congruent angles are congruent. Supplements of congruent angles are congruent. This is a very challenging topic. It's very new. It's going to be challenging. You have to try them out yourself. Use your notes to answer the questions in your homework and on the review sheet because that will help you write them. Do not wait and have yourself come in with no help. You want to try it on your own and make your corrections. Thank you for listening to the lesson 2.4. Have a great day.